Okay, welcome to this video about model to execute. Before I go and show you the technical aspects of it, I want to talk about the purpose and the mission behind model to execute. The mission of Software AG is to give you a digital platform that allows you to drive an agile business or make your organization agile by making it easy for you to create application quickly and effectively. And model to execute is at the core of that. And model to execute is also at the core of what ARIS is all about. ARIS was invented about 20 years ago, a little over, actually more than 20 years ago. Must be close to 30 years by now, actually. And it was invented by Professor Scher. And Professor Scher saw that the business and IT did not communicate very well with each other because they lived in such different worlds. And back then, the business and IT would use Word documents to, communicate with each other by defining requirement and then giving that to the IT people. And Professor Scher realized that there must be a much, much better way, and a model is a much, much better way, because a model is something that anybody can understand and that the business can build and the IT folks can much better understand. So ARIS is at the core of bridging, the gap between business and IT. And so model to execute really now makes that real, because what we really do with model to execute is we can use ARIS to define the business requirement, to define the business process, much more detailed and much better than what we can do with normal BPMN tools. But then we can take what we've built there and move it over into our application development system. And I'm going to show this to you with webMethods, but you can also do this with other programs. And so literally a model to execute is about showing you this bridge. And so this is what I want to show you, how this works with ARIS and with webMethods. And so let's jump right into it. I want to start with looking at a process that is defined in an EPC. So here we have an onboarding process where we recruit employees, and then when we actually have a new employee, we assign an office, we establish an office, we request a computer, we calculate the salary, we schedule new hire training, and we review the employee data. Then we signal the employee acceptance, and we sign a contract here as well. So this is the process, how it is designed. You can also see we have a couple of other things here that we're working with. First of all, we have a data object that is the employee itself, and we have a couple of organizational units that are responsible for different types of these activities. So some of this is going to be done by facilities, some by IT, some by finance, some by HR. We also have here a metric which is called runtime restriction, and so on. Now, in order to actually move this into webMethods, we can't use an EPC. We need to use BPMN. So the question immediately comes up, well, why didn't we just define this process in BPMN? Why do we use an EPC? And many organizations will just use BPMN and don't need EPCs, but EPCs have a lot more functionality, a lot more details, and allow you to create also sub-processes behind it. So you see here just the different activities that we can use. And right now I'm using a filter that is specific to BPMN, so it only allows me to use objects. That makes sense for a model to execute type of scenarios. But in general, we have just a lot more functionality in the EPC. So this is why for some customers, it will still make sense to define a process in an EPC and then automatically translate it into BPMN. And so this is one of the key functionality we can do with ARIS. So you see here, there's a button that says generate BPMN. Before I go there, I want to validate my process, and I can run this the step here which says validate for BPMN, and this will basically just run validation and check if my process has been defined in a way that we can actually just automatically create a BPMN process out of it. Now I've received here a couple of warnings. And I can mouse over these warnings, and it tells me here that a function should be linked either to exactly one service type. And so I can ignore this warning because I'm going to take care of that in webMethods. We're going to assign services to these particular steps, and then this will automatically take care of that stuff. So I could do this in ARIS, but I don't have to. So I'm just going to do this in webMethods. So I'm okay with this, and we're ready to go. So I'm going to now generate the BPMN. Okay, and this takes a couple of minutes, and we've gotten some warnings. Those will be the exact same warnings we just checked out, so I'm just going to ignore them. And so now I have to create a version, and I just, leave it here. This is the version before the export, so I could write something more specifically here so we could define which version this is. All right, so now it's asking me where to write this process. I'm going to call this process onboarding. I'm going to write it right here. Okay, and now I have my BPMN process here in ARIS. And I'm going to change it up a little bit. There's a couple things I don't like about it. So for instance, I don't like the way where this contract signed is here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to move this over here. That to me looks a lot prettier. Now it's important that this stays on the same lane. So we can do this. The next thing I want to do, I just want to send this over to IT. Now, again, what I have to do, I have to validate this for IT. This is just kind of a technical semantic check, making sure that, this model is fine so I can send it over to webMethods. And again, I'm getting the same sort of error messages that I've gotten in ARIS. Hey, what are the actual service types that we're going to use? I can, again, ignore this because I'm going to define this in webMethods. And so now I'm going to send this over to webMethods by clicking this button, share with IT. So we have these warnings here. So it's outputting us this warning. Again, they're fine. I know what they are, so I can ignore them. So I'm just going to go and share this with IT. Again, I have to define a version here. Now what's going to happen, the EPC is already locked up. We can't change it anymore because it's been sent over. And the same is going on with now BPMN. Because we're sending it over to webMethods, the process is over there now. We can't change it anymore in ARIS. This is so to make sure that both of these are in sync. We can do changes and then back synchronize them. So we can do this, but we can't just now change the model without actually communicating the changes back to webMethod. Okay, this was successful, and now I'm done with ARIS. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to go over into the process developer. And in the process developer, I've done this before on a different model. So what I need to do now here, I need to go over to ARIS and I need to refresh this task. And what you can see here is this new process, onboarding process that has appeared. And I need to import this here basically by running this import and putting this process underneath my M2E process. And that's it. And now here in my M2E, I have my new process here. And if I double click on it, I have this process model that we have generated. Looks exactly like the one we had in ARIS. Just, the UI from webMethods. So now I've successfully moved my process from ARIS into webMethods, and now here in webMethods, I'm going to make this process real. So in order to do that, we're going to go to the packet navigator, and here we have different services, and we have a particular service here for the M2E process support. And here we have a document that represents an employee, and I'm going to throw this on my employee received. And this already changes kind of my start event, and we now have here a particular document that is coming in on the start event. So this document has certain attributes. So this basically now defines what is coming in, the type of data that must be coming in for this start event. And so now we have these assign office function, and what I have here are services that I can put behind it. And so these services are kind of dummy predefined services that are very simple, but just show us that there's some actual code happening here now behind the step. And what I can do in webMethods is I can just simply drag and drop a service onto the step. And now this activity has become an actual service. And we also see here this little icon shows us that it's a service. And so now also the warning that we've received before, what type of service it is, has been mitigated simply by automatically recognizing what type of service it is when we drag and drop a service on top of it. If we now take a look at it, we have inputs and outputs here, and we can see that automatically the input from the previous step the employee received is coming in, and also the output is again an employee. What is going to change in this employee is that this employee is actually going to get an office assigned to it. So the data of the employee is going to change, but the document will be basically carried through here, this step. Then we have a manual process here, this established office that doesn't do anything. So now the next step is request computer. And here again, we have a process that we throw on top of it. And then we also have a process for calculate salary. We have a process for schedule new hire training. And then we have another kind of manual process where just somebody needs to review this employee data. We're not going to put any sort of a user interface on top of it because we just want to show right now in this demo that we can actually have real code behind these models. And so the next step is then that our employee contract signed needs to come in here. And just so for debugging, I need to cheat here a little bit. Instead of making this basically something that has to come in parallel, I'm just gonna cheat here and make sure that we don't stop here and actually wait for a real contract. So I'm changing this for complex, and I'm making this an OR. So either way, how I come through this process, we're gonna go into this next step, which is the create employee acceptance. And I'm gonna throw this on my last step, and then we are done. And so now I've created this process. Every step of these inputs and outputs will be carried forward. The service does something with it. I can just go into one of these services and show you how they work. So we're using here, this is a flow service. Flow is kind of a visual way in webMethods to code. So I'm not going to go into how a flow service works. That would be a different topic. But basically here there's a bunch of stuff that is going on here where certain programmatical rules are applied. So we're checking here, what's the experience, what's the title, if the title is driver, programmer, consultant, blah, blah, blah. So we're basically checking what's going on here. And then depending on what type of title we have and how much experience we have, we're going to assign a different type of salary. So this is just very kind of stupid, simple code. This is just a demo. But the point is here that we can define code in a service, and then we can attach the service to a step in the process. And the functionality of webMethods allows us for objects to automatically travel from one step to another. So every one of these steps now has this object that kind of moves the employee document from one step to the other. Every service does something with it, and at the end of it, we should have a document of a particular employee that has a salary, has an office, and also has a training date set. So all that sort of stuff. Okay, so now let's debug this. And in order to debug this, we go here into debug configuration. And then we can say we want to debug this employee worker process. And we can now go into this debug perspective. And we can then here run this debugger. And when we run this debugger, we need to provide the input for employee. So as you can see here, this initial document that we need to provide in the beginning is something that the debugger is asking us for now. And so here we can add all the data for this particular document type. I'm going to call this guy Mr. Test. Going to decide he's supposed to be a manager and he has 15 years of experience. And so now we're here in the very first step, and we can now step through these steps. And as you can see here, we have this document, this employee document, and Mr. Test manager 15 years. That's the data we just provided. So now as we step through in this assign office step here, we should be able to have an office. And you can see this guy has been assigned Office 570. And so now if I request a computer here, we can then see he's gotten a laptop. And if we then go further, we calculate his salary. How much does a manager make? He makes $85,000. And we can go further and step all the way through the end. And here at the end, we then see all the data that we have. So we have the salary, the office, the laptop, and we have a training date that has been assigned. And so this is an example of how this works. Yeah, and this wraps up the demo that I wanted to show for model to execute. We've started in ARIS, so taken an EPC, translated it into a BPMN model, moved that BPMN model into webMethods, assigned services and documents to the process, and then built the process and executed it by debugging it, by walking through it in debug mode. And we were able to see how every step of the process does some computational change to the document that is the input and both the output of this process. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions about that, if you need any help with this, get in touch with us, either with your account manager at Software AG, or feel also free to contact me directly. So thank you very much, and see you in the next Software AG video.